All right, so today we're going deep on Elon Musk with Walter Isaacson's new biography as our guide. It's crazy, how much his childhood seems to play into like his companies and his whole, I don't know, style as a leader. Let's start with that South Africa upbringing. It
Wait a
sounds
minute.
kind of rough, right?
Oh, yeah. Isaacson doesn't really hold back on that. Like, the relationship with his dad, Errol, that was tough. There's stories about Errol just constantly putting Elon down,
Mm.
calling him names, even, like, questioning his intelligence. It's
That's harsh. I mean, do you think that kind of experience, do you think it like made him into this super demanding leader later on? Or is that more about like
Yeah.
him just needing to reach these like crazy ambitious goals, no matter what the cost?
Yeah, I mean, probably a mix of both, right?
Yeah.
Isaacson kind of suggests that, like,
Yeah.
Musk built this, like, thick skin and this whole never back down attitude, almost like a defense against his dad's, harshness.
Yeah.
But that same kind of resilience, that's what fuels him to just go after these goals relentlessly. It's almost like he's always trying to prove something, not just to everyone else, but maybe to himself too.
Yeah, and it's interesting how his first wife, Justine, she talks about how he basically learned to just shut down emotionally, almost like built up these walls to protect himself, which, I mean, given his childhood,
Hmm.
makes sense. But then, maybe it affected how he connects with people, like on a deeper level.
Absolutely. And that emotional detachment, maybe that explains why he can be so
Mm.
demanding, but even kind of ruthless sometimes. Like,
Yeah.
he sees that big picture,
Mhm.
that mission, whatever it is, that's got to be more important than like individual feelings.
And it wasn't just personal stuff, right? Even back at PayPal, Isaacson talks about these clashes, these like legendary clashes. But then that same drive, that's what gets him to start SpaceX with this crazy goal of like colonizing Mars.
Yeah.
Was that ambition? Was that risk? Was that always there? Or is that something else?
Well, there's this story about his dad taking him to casinos when he was a kid, trying to teach him how to like beat roulette. Maybe that's where it comes from. Like getting comfortable with risk or even believing that. Like
Mhm.
you can outsmart fate.
It's funny, right? And it sounds like his dad, even with all the bad stuff, had a huge impact.
For sure. But Musk, he also kind of like found refuge in other things too, like
Yeah.
books and computers, video games. He was like this coding prodigy, made his first video game when he was 12. And you can see that entrepreneurial thing like early on. There's that story about him and his cousin. They were going to set up a video game arcade. They even had a business plan and everything, but they were too young to get permits.
That's wild. That's incredible. It sounds like he was always wired differently.
Yeah, definitely. And all those early experiences with tech, probably that's what like the skills,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The skills that made him a billionaire later. But it's
Mhm.
interesting to see like how his personality even then was causing some clashes. Like he was brilliant, but not always easy to work with.
Okay, let's talk SpaceX. I mean, literally, he wanted to make us a multiplanetary species. Like,
Right.
the risks there were astronomical.
Literally.
Isaacson says he almost went bankrupt multiple times. What kept him going when, I mean, it seemed like everything was against him.
It really seems like for him, failure wasn't an option. There's this crazy story
Mm.
about him going to Russia to buy like decommissioned missiles because he needed a cheap way to get rockets into space. And when that didn't work out, he was so frustrated with like the Air Force and all their bureaucracy is like, they're moving too slow.
So he just did it himself, built his own rockets from scratch.
Exactly. Yeah. Got this team of like brilliant engineers and basically like taught himself rocket science. There's stories about him sleeping under his desk at SpaceX, like fixing broken rocket parts with a hammer, pushing his team to hit these like impossible deadlines.
It's almost manic, right?
Oh, it was intense for sure. Some people admired his drive. Others, they wondered if he was putting speed ahead of safety. But that relentless push, that's what got SpaceX to do what everyone thought was impossible. Become like this major player in space, landing reusable rockets and all that.
It's mind-blowing. And all this was happening while he's also involved with Tesla, right? How did he manage both pushing boundaries in completely different ways?
That's the question, isn't it? He wasn't the founder of Tesla, remember? He invested early. But it was Martin Eberhard who had the original vision for the Roadster, that first
Yeah.
electric sports car.
Yeah. And he wasn't even really on board at first
Yeah.
with how Eberhard was doing things, like all the outsourcing, right? He thought they should be building more in-house.
Yeah, totally. And he also had this like way more ambitious vision for the company, I think. It wasn't just luxury sports cars. It was make electric vehicles, like mainstream. So that clash of visions, plus Musk getting more and more hands-on, that led to some real tension between them.
Yeah, there's that story about him going to Ludus in the UK without even telling Eberhard. Lotus was making the chassis for the Roadster, and Musk was already thinking ahead, making connections that would lead to him basically taking over Tesla.
It is fascinating to see how he operates, like
Yeah,
always thinking multiple steps ahead,
yeah.
and he's not afraid to. Like, go behind people's backs if he thinks it's what it takes to, like, reach his goal.
So how did he end up taking over Tesla? Did Eberhard just step down?
Not really, no. There was a lot of clashing, a lot of drama. Musk's, leadership style led to a lot of people leaving Tesla. And eventually the board, they sided with Musk
Yeah.
and pushed Eberhard out.
Wow, so he basically staged a coup.
Yeah, it wasn't pretty. But it worked, right? And once he was in charge, he completely reshaped Tesla, poured in his own money, brought in top engineers, pushed everyone to the limit to create the electric cars we know today.
And he was so hands-on, right? Like Isaacson talks about him sleeping on the factory floor, testing cars on the line, even demanding that they get rid of robots that he thought were slowing things down.
He was obsessed with efficiency, cutting through, bureaucracy, pushing his team to do what everyone thought was impossible.
Yeah.
And that's what, made Tesla the success it is today.
It's amazing it's all happening at the same time. Two groundbreaking companies pushing technology, and on top of that, all the personal challenges that Isaacson writes about.
Yeah, a lot to process. And we haven't even touched on, his personal life, his relationships, his family, all the toll this drive has taken. That's something we'll dig into in the next part of our deep dive.
It sounds like we're just getting started. Okay, so back to Elon and all his adventures. Last time we went from that intense childhood to founding SpaceX and that whole Tesla takeover thing. But let's get personal for a bit. Isaacson doesn't shy away from showing that, Musk's ambition, it often came at a cost, especially in his personal life. His first wife, Justine, she's pretty open in the book about, the challenges they faced. And
yeah, it's tough to read sometimes.
Yeah.
She talks about feeling almost like an employee in her own marriage, just constantly trying to meet Elon's demands.
That's sad to hear. She also mentions, sometimes his remarks could be kind of cruel and that he, I don't know, struggled with empathy.
Do you think that lack of emotional awareness, is that connected back to his childhood maybe?
It's definitely possible. Isaacson seems to stress that, those early experiences with his dad might have, I don't know, taught him to kind of suppress his emotions, as a way to cope,
Yeah.
let him focus on achieving, but also made it hard to connect with people on that deeper level emotionally. And it wasn't just Justine, right? His relationships with Amber Heard and Grimes and Tallulah Riley, they were all pretty high profile and often pretty messy too. Is there a pattern there, do you think?
Yeah. I mean, there does seem to be this recurring thing. Strong, independent women drawn to his brilliance, his ambition, but then they struggle, right, to maintain a healthy partnership with him. It's almost like he expects them to operate on his level of intensity, which for most people is just not sustainable,
He's had family struggles too, right? Losing his first son, that was devastating. And Isaacson touches on that strained relationship with his brother, Kimball. It seems like those personal losses, they really weigh on him, even though he doesn't show it much publicly.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even someone like Elon Musk, he's still human, vulnerable to the same pain, the same heartache, but he seems to compartmentalize, push those emotions aside to focus on his work.
Which brings us to the big one, Twitter. Buying it seemed so impulsive, reckless even, some people said. Was this a calculated move or just pure Musk instinct?
It's tough to say for sure. Isaacson spent a lot of time on this whole saga, and it's really fascinating to see how it unfolds. Remember, this was all happening while Musk was getting more and more frustrated with what he saw as censorship online,
Yeah.
especially around COVID and other hot button issues.
Yeah. And he was already a huge Twitter user, right? Engaging with fans, promoting his companies, even getting into public arguments.
Exactly. So when he had the chance to buy it, it almost felt inevitable. All his obsessions, right? Free speech, technology, disrupting things, it all converged on this one platform.
But it was a huge gamble, right? Twitter was already so complex, so controversial. Did he underestimate how hard it would be?
Maybe. Isaacson portrays him as someone who really believes that he can solve anything, no matter how complex. He saw Twitter as broken, something he could fix. But maybe he didn't fully grasp the human side of it all, the complexities of content moderation and the pushback he'd get from all sides.
The book really captures that chaos of the takeover, the layoffs, the whole Twitter blue mess, advertisers fleeing. It felt like everything was imploding.
Oh, it was definitely turbulent. And his leadership, what worked at SpaceX and Tesla, It didn't always translate to social media. The impulsive tweets, the micromanaging, that confrontational style, it just created this constant feeling of turmoil.
And remember that crazy story about him personally moving servers from Sacramento to Portland, like in the middle of the night to cut costs?
Oh yeah, classic Musk. Shows his like hands-on style, willing to get in the trenches. But it also makes you wonder about his ability to delegate, to trust his team. It's like he has to be involved in every little thing.
So did he achieve what he wanted with Twitter? Is it this free speech utopia he was aiming for?
That's a good question, Anna. It's hard to say for sure. He definitely shook things up, made big changes, started a lot of conversations about censorship, online safety, the power of these platforms. But were those changes for the better? I think only time will tell.
Okay, so let's break down some of those changes. The layoffs were huge, like 75% of the workforce. What was his reasoning there? Just costs? Or was there something more?
He argued that Twitter was like bloated, inefficient, too much bureaucracy. He thought a smaller team could move faster, innovate better. And to be fair, Twitter did have some of that, redundancies, inefficiencies before he came along.
But it also felt like he was trying to, I don't know, reshape the culture, get rid of what he called that woke bias, make it a platform more aligned with his views.
Yeah, that's a good point. He brought in people who thought like him. And he wasn't shy about pushing back against what he saw as political correctness. But you got to remember, Twitter's global. Diverse users, different viewpoints, trying to force one ideology on that was always going to be tough.
And then there was the whole Twitter Blue thing, revamping the subscription model. That seemed to backfire big time. Impersonations, advertisers pulling out.
Yeah, that was a miscalculation for sure. The idea was you pay for verification, helps fight bots and spam, but the rollout was just bad. Created confusion, mistrust, and it shows the risk of, like Musk's impulsive decision-making.
It's like he acts on instinct a lot, trusts his gut even when people say, hey, maybe not.
Right, is that a strength or a weakness? It's both, honestly. That intuition, that risk-taking, that's what got him this far, but it also leads to mistakes, impulsive stuff that backfires. It's a constant balancing act.
So where does Twitter stand now after all that? Is it that free speech haven he imagined?
It's still changing. Still a work in progress, really. The platform's different, for sure, both in features and, like, the overall vibe. But what's the long-term impact of Musk being in charge? Too early to say.
But it's clear that his vision for Twitter is just one part of this, like, much bigger thing. We haven't even touched on his fears about AI, his ambitions for Neuralink, that whole sustainable future thing. There's so much more to explore in this deep dive.
Absolutely. And in the next part, we'll dig into those other sides of Musk's vision, the companies, the tech that he thinks will shape the future, of humanity.
Can't wait. Stay tuned. Okay, so we've covered a lot with Elon, haven't we? Childhood, SpaceX, Tesla, that whole Twitter roller coaster. But now let's get into, I don't know, maybe the really wild stuff. Isaacson, he doesn't just cover the companies, right? He goes for, like, Musk's overall vision for the future, and it's, well, something else.
It is, yeah. We've talked about his drive, his ambition, but what really jumps out in these later chapters is the sense of urgency he has. Like, it's not just about cool tech, it's about solving these existential threats to humanity, at least, as he sees them,
And those threats, they're not always what you'd expect. Like, obviously, climate change is a big one, and he's addressing that with Tesla, solar, all that. But Isaacson really gets into Musk's fear of AI. Like, artificial intelligence going rogue, that seems to be a huge driver behind Neuralink.
That's the key to understanding Neuralink, I think. For Musk, it's not just about, like, brain-computer interfaces being cool. It's about making sure humans can keep up with AI, maybe even merge with it, control it.
Yeah, it's a wild concept. And the book describes those early demos, right? Monkeys playing Pong with their minds. It's incredible, but also kind of creepy, isn't it? What happens if that becomes, like, everyday tech? What are the ethics of all that?
Isaacson lays out both sides pretty well. Like, on the one hand, you've got the potential to treat brain diseases, improve our abilities. But then there's that whole other side, surveillance, control, even hacking our brains. That stuff we're barely even starting to think about as a society.
And Musk is just going for it, full speed ahead. Like, typical Musk, right? He seems to think the benefits outweigh the risks, that it's a gamble we have to take. And it's interesting how that connects to SpaceX, too. He's not just trying to get to Mars. It's like
a backup plan for humanity, right? If Earth goes kaput. There's definitely this, thread of pessimism or maybe realism running through it all. He's not just some, like, wide-eyed optimist about the future. He sees real dangers, whether it's AI or climate or who knows what, right? And his companies, to him, they're ways to, like, hedge against those dangers, give us options.
It's a lot to absorb, and Isaacson really does a good job showing all these different sides of how Musk thinks. Okay, let's touch on some other ventures. We haven't talked much about the Boring Company, tunneling under cities to fix traffic. Is that just another one of his crazy ideas? Or
I think what's interesting about Boring Company is that it almost feels like a side project for Musk.
yeah.
Something he's doing for fun, but then it also ties into this bigger vision he has about like transportation, cities, all that. He hates traffic, sees it as this huge waste, and he wants radical solutions.
And then there's all the renewable energy stuff, which goes beyond just Tesla, right? He's been pushing solar power, investing in...
Energy storage, yeah.
Is that just smart business, or is it a genuine desire to, like, save the planet?
It's hard to separate the two of them, but Isaacson presents him as someone who really does believe that we've got to move away from fossil fuels.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not just talking, he's putting his money and his skills behind it.
So, after spending all this time with Musk, through this book, I mean, what's your takeaway? What kind of legacy do you think he'll leave behind?
It's tough to say, honestly. He's a polarizing guy. Some people think he's a visionary genius. Others say he's just a reckless, egotistical, whatever, right? But you can't deny the impact he's had. He's pushed tech, challenged how we think, made us face some of the biggest questions we have.
And yeah, you have to admire that. Like, that audacity, that willingness to dream big and take those risks, it's like he's operating on a whole other level.
Totally. Love him or hate him, you can't ignore him. He's a force of nature, this whirlwind of ideas. And whether his companies make it or not, his impact's going to be felt for a long time.
That's a great way to put it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the mind of Elon Musk. It's a journey that leaves you with more questions than answers, but maybe that's the point. Hopefully you've got a new perspective on the man behind the missions and the challenges and the opportunities that are out there.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, thanks for diving in with us. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.